Hey, so today's webinar is going to be about fitting long-term care insurance into your estate plan. I'm Brian Barrera. I'm an elder law attorney in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and with me is Tobe Gerard. Toby, please tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Brian. My name is Tobe Gerard. I'm a long-term care insurance specialist, and I've been doing that for coming up on 23 years now. So we only do products that offer long-term care insurance protection.
Okay, so let's get right into it.
Sure.
What is it? What is long-term care insurance? And what there are various versions of this, I believe.
Sure. So long-term care insurance is the insurance that covers what we call extended care or chronic care. I usually like to think of it as the kind of need that a person has that isn't going to get well. So when I say chronic, it's no longer acute. It hasn't been resolved in the hospital or rehab. It's something that is going to require additional care, either at home, assisted living, adult day, nursing home, or hospice. Care can be delivered in any of those settings by having a long-term care insurance policy.
Okay, and what types of policies are there?
So there's basically two types of policies today. There's what we call traditional long-term care insurance that's owned the industry for many decades, and then hybrid long-term care insurance, which is a newer platform. Traditional long-term care insurance is just long-term care insurance, pure long-term care. It's not coupled with anything else. Hybrid long-term care insurance is generally long-term care insurance with life insurance, or it could be long-term care insurance with an annuity. And both platforms are available today in the market.
And when does family health history, like
Mm,
from your parents,
right.
come into these policies?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. It didn't always come in, but I would say in the last 5 to 8 years, the traditional long-term care companies do ask about it, and they do ding you if you have one company. It's an immediate biological family member, so that would be father, mother, siblings. Ding meaning you cannot necessarily have benefits beyond a certain point. They would limit the monthly benefit, they would limit the benefit duration. If you, and that would be for one, if you have two family members, biological immediate, it could be very challenging to find more than one company that would consider. So
Well,
it's
how do they find out about this? We can believe that we had that a relative had dementia, but we don't necessarily know what the diagnosis is.
So it really depends how the person answers the question. We don't know that either, but the question is, do you have an immediate biological family member, and then they put in parentheses, mother, father, sibling, who had or has Alzheimer's or another form of dementia? If the person answers yes, then we're dealing more with the ding. If the person says, my parents had memory loss, but I don't know that it was necessarily Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, then they're not going to answer yes. So it's all how they answer that question. The hybrids do not at this time care about family history, where they may in the future. Right now, if someone has a cognitive family history, they would want to think about securing long-term care insurance sooner rather than waiting.
Okay, so what do these policies care about? What are the disqualifying types of issues?
Okay. So because they are medically underwritten, they do go back for medical records. They do a phone interview. Sometimes they send out a nurse depending upon the person's age. Major disqualifiers are things that are already degenerative. So if somebody has a diagnosis of a cognitive impairment, someone has Parkinson's, someone has MS, someone has ALS, someone has complications from diabetes, someone has a complicated psych profile, someone has a build issue, and build would be what we refer to when someone's height and weight are really out of proportion. A lot of times the companies will not consider if their build is off the charts. So I would always say to people, give us a call or an email if you want to run a health condition past us, and we could let you know if it's going to be a challenge or not.
Are they asking people 5 words? Are all companies having the nurse ask, can you remember these 5 words later on?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is part of the cognitive assessment with these insurance companies. It's something called delayed word recall, where they give you a certain number of words. They ask you to put them in a sentence, and then they come back to you maybe 5 or 10 minutes later and say, Brian, how many of those words can you remember? And passing could be a different amount with most companies. Most of the time it's going to be 6 or 7. But if you get tripped up on something like that, chances are there's already some issues that are presenting themselves.
Or maybe you were never good at that.
That is very
Yeah,
possible. Yes, I had a client that said, I hope they don't ask me math because I was never good in math. But
right.
it is important to let people know that at a certain age, and with most it's going to be 60, a few or less, a few or more, but from 60 on up, they're going to have a cognitive assessment because there is so much early onset available today.
Okay. All right. So we're talking about insurance that not just covers nursing home care, it can cover assisted living, it can cover
Right,
care at home.
right.
Um, and people start paying for this. It's a level premium. You pay a certain dollar amount every month or every quarter or a year. What are the chances of it going up after you've locked in for a while?
Yeah, so I guess the important thing to say, there's no real lock in on the pricing. The products, if we're talking traditional long-term care, are guaranteed renewable, but they've never been guaranteed that the pricing won't change. The only way to get around that, if you have a fear of the vulnerability of a rate increase, is you can lock in on a 10 pay program or a single pay. In other words, you're taking what would normally be a payment stream over many, many years, and you're condensing it either into one premium payment or 10 years of premium payments. But in the time that people own this, if they step in their 50s and they don't go on claim until their mid to late 80s, they're probably going to have some rate increases. But the rate increases do have to be filed with the insurance commissioner. They have to be actuarially sound if they want to be considered. And then the commissioner can decide, do I want to approve this rate increase? Do I want to approve it with modifications, or do I not want to approve it at all?
Okay. Well, since you brought up the fact that you might buy it at one age and need it 30 years later,
Correct.
how do you make sure inflation doesn't just wipe out the value of your policy?
Right. So I think any good long-term care insurance specialist, depending on your age, is going to recommend inflation. It's the only leverage you have to keep up with the cost of care and to mitigate the risk. So if someone steps in their late 40s all the way through many times in their mid 60s, we're going to have them look at inflation because, again, if the average age of claim is mid to late 80s, they could be looking at a trajectory of 30 or 40 years before they use the policy. So inflation becomes key. Very expensive, but key.
I once ran numbers for somebody who had bought it at age 50 all the way through 80. Now,
Mhm.
the inflation in long-term care has been 6%. And from what I've seen, the maximum that you can get on a compounded inflation basis is 5%. And over those 30 years, even with 5% compound inflation, the policy lost 40% of its value.
Mm.
Um, so maybe one of the rules would be don't buy it too young.
Well, the reason people buy it, and I would say certainly too young, might be if you're raising children and if your kids haven't gone to college yet. I mean, there's competing priorities on your expense stream, which is why you don't see a lot of people in their 40s stepping into this. They may be thinking more about some heavy duty life insurance, but people start thinking about this in more the pre-retirement years, when most of the time we see, if they've had children, the children are pretty much on their own. And then they start thinking, what are we going to need going forward? You are correct. 5% is the maximum compound inflation you can buy today, but it's so expensive, most people only buy 3%.
And one last question about these policies that I've got is what about spouses being able to share their benefits? There are policies out there where they can link their policies.
Absolutely. So different companies call them different things, but mostly the concept is sharing. And the sharing is in one of two ways. Either you each have identical policies, and if one of you exhausts your policy, you take from your spouse. Each company tells you how much you can take of the spouse's policy, so you don't leave them bare. And then there's another concept of sharing that says you each have your own policy, and then there's a third joint pool that's available to either of you. So you never take from each other's policies, you just take from the joint pool.
Okay, so this is a real benefit. I suggest long-term care insurance to all of my clients who are older, if they can afford it, because you got to look at your budget going forward, and it's got to fit into your retirement income. And if it doesn't, then you don't want to be buying it and then keeping it for a while and then dropping it.
Correct.
So a few years ago, our state legislature put in place a law that says if you have a minimum policy sold in Massachusetts, your home is off the table as an asset.
Correct.
So this is a tremendous benefit because the insurance protects a shack or a mansion.
Right.
And if you buy a policy, the law at one point was $50 a day, and it could not be a group policy. It had to be an individual policy. And then March of 99, March
yeah.
15th, it changed to $125 a day, and it's stuck there, but it could be a group policy.
Right.
It doesn't have to be an individual policy starting on that date. I would assume at some point that they're going to increase it from 125. It's been there now for 23 years.
Right.
It's kind of amazing that it's just an amazing exception in the law.
Right.
That it protects your home. Now, it protects your home if you stay in your home. So the Mass Health lawyers are always creative in coming up with new arguments to try to beat back what the legislature has done. And so if you went to assisted living, is this now your home? Does your assisted living facility become your home so that the policy doesn't protect your home anymore? That's an open question, I think.
Right.
But if you stay at home and do not use up your entire policy, you can use up most of it. Correct. As long as there's something left on the policy.
Right.
When you go to a nursing home, your house is off the table as an asset.
Yes, it's a great benefit. And most of the policies have some kind of a stamp that says your policy does or doesn't meet the requirements of the Mass Health lien exemption.
Now, so I'm often suggesting to people that they buy this, but you know, the minimum policy that could be sold is $125 a day, 2 years.
Correct.
And the elimination period, the kind of waiting period before the benefit kicks in, can be as long as a year.
Correct.
So that would be the cheapest policy that someone could buy. That's useless. To me, that's that's like buying homeowners insurance and not long-term care insurance. So if you what I tell people to do is compare a minimum policy, the policy that might cover $250 or $300 a day, and maybe it's a little more money, but maybe then you have something that might benefit you. If you buy $125 a day for home health benefits, you're not going to even get 4 hours a day of coverage based on current rates.
That's correct.
So maybe go higher. I mean, every little bit counts. If you need help later on in life at home, you're not touching your assets. You're saving your home. You can use up most of this policy at home. And you're protecting your home. You're protecting your other assets by having money come out of the policy.
Right.
Something is better than nothing.
Yes. And we have never sold just a minimum policy. Exactly to your point, Brian, We offer some comparisons, maybe stepping up the daily benefits, stepping up, because the minimum doesn't require any inflation. So we would want to quote it with inflation. And, in Massachusetts, 2 years is the minimum that you could buy for long-term care insurance anyway. We have other states that allow short-term care, but we don't in Massachusetts. So 2 years, 125 a day, like you said, 365. The elimination period can't be more than that, and there's no requirement for inflation. So even if you're going to buy long-term care insurance, no matter what, you're getting this extra bonus.
Now, what I do with some of my clients is a married couple, they can't afford real long-term care insurance, let's say. They can't afford both real policies, good policy,
Yes.
to really cover them. And let's say they're doing something like the minimum. They both apply, and if one gets it, we move the house into that one's name. There has been a law since 1985, a federal law that the state has to follow, that if you leave assets in trust for your spouse, those assets are completely protected if you ever need nursing home care. So in a typical situation, let's say the husband is able to get the insurance. We put the house in his name. He signs a will, leaving it in trust for his wife.
Mhm.
It's there for her favorite child. She might not want to say who her favorite is, but the child that will always take care of her winds up being the one in charge of the trust. And we've essentially protected the house. No 5-year look back on this by moving it between spouses. It's safe right away. And we can protect the house. Now, the reason I just said the husband is you provided me with a chart about 3 or 4 years ago that kind of amazed me about the differences in prices between male and female. Go ahead.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Yes, we have what's called gender-based pricing, which we did not have for many, many years. And again, the years kind of go together, but I'd say somewhere between 5 and 8 years ago, they started charging more for women because women, as we all know, live longer. Women file the claims. So they decided that actuarially, if this is where they're coming from, they need to charge more for women. So when you look at pricing, you could have both members of the couple being very close in age, and her premium is going to be significantly more, especially if you've got a single woman where there's no ability to factor in a couple's discount. That person is going to have the highest premium, would be a single female. So yes. And many times too, we have people that say, well, I don't, my husband doesn't want to use his policy, we're saving it. And that is another concept. Women will take care of their husbands many times, not trigger a claim, but then when they need to use their policy, they don't want to be a burden to the rest of their family. So hence they're the ones filing the claims.
Okay. So when we play this, I don't want to say the word game publicly, but when we do this planning maneuver of moving the house into one name with a will with a testamentary trust, often it's the husband who gets the policy as long as he can remember all those words that were thrown at him. And that is really a trap for the unwary, that you're going to get that cognitive test. There's a book that was written by a basketball player named Jerry Lucas back in the 70s called The Memory Book.
Okay.
And this guy was amazing. I saw him on the Tonight Show. He just remembered every person in the front 2 rows on the left. Remembered what tidbits about them. Now that could just be him, but he wrote a book with somebody else about how to link things together and kind of remember. And it might be a good thing for people who are thinking about buying insurance like this to read the book and practice.
Yeah. They can definitely practice. It is our responsibility as agents to let people know what the underwriting process is and to talk about the cognitive assessment. I have actually had people that made flashcards and practice, because it if that is your concern, and if you're going to have anxiety, it's not a bad thing to practice ahead of time. And you can't take notes, you can't scribble, you can't doodle. You just have to remember.
And I believe that in your first physical, when you're on Medicare, they ask you these, they do a
They
test
do.
like this.
Yes,
So
exactly.
and a neurologist in the Plymouth area once put a person under signed a medical certificate and stated the person was incompetent because she couldn't remember 3 words a minute later.
Mm,
So, I mean, your liberty could be taken away from you later on if you don't remember words and can't retrieve these. So it's important to practice. All right, so I've got a couple of other little planning maneuvers.
sure, go for it.
One is really tricky. Um, there's a way to save assets with insurance. There is something called a mass health case called an over-under, where the private pay rate that they're advertising at nursing homes is way above what the mass health rate is.
Right.
So, like a lot of nursing homes might charge 16 grand right now,
Mhm.
but when they might get 7,000 a month, including your income when you're on mass health. So if you can get somebody's income when they're in a nursing home up to 7 grand, there might be ways to protect assets. So if you got a little bit of insurance,
Mhm.
add that to your income,
Right.
and then buy an annuity with your assets and get your assets up into the 7, 8, 9,000 range, your monthly income.
Mhm.
Um, you can go on mass health, and then the rest of the annuity ends up being an inheritance.
Mhm.
So that's another little tricky little advantage to long-term care insurance, that
Right.
your income if and when you need nursing home care would be high enough so that your other assets can be protected.
Right. Right. It's another planning strategy.
It's tricky, and it doesn't fit. Some of these strategies don't fit everybody. Here's another one. You you buy long-term care insurance to protect your home, but you don't want to put your assets into your children's name, your other assets, your money. You don't want to put them in an irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust puts your money between the 2 generations. Doesn't belong to either generation. So that's not a great move with your money. So you you buy the long-term care insurance, and then you put your home into an irrevocable trust. Later on, if you're ever approaching nursing home care, you buy the house back from the trust. The house was safe in the trust. The house is still safe because you have long-term care insurance.
Mhm.
The money was not safe because it was in your name alone. Now the money is in the trust where it's safe. So you can effectively protect the value of your home times 2
Mhm.
with long-term care insurance and an irrevocable trust for your home. Um, that doesn't work for everybody.
Correct.
You know,
Correct.
another situation is a spouse. Um, when two spouses have assets, if you're over a magic number, you've got to spend the extra amount on your spouse, or on, you got to buy an annuity. Now, there's an open issue right now we're waiting for a case from the SJC on how that works. The state wants to be the beneficiary.
Right.
I actually had a client who moved in, a married couple. They moved in with their only child. And then the mother went to a nursing home. The father was left with, should I buy an annuity? The state wants to be the beneficiary of the annuity. But he had long-term care insurance. So what I had him do is buy the house from his son.
Mhm.
Now his son
Protect the
had
home.
the money. The father had the house, but the house is protected by the long-term care insurance. And
Right.
then we made sure we got his daughter-in-law involved in this and to understand how this all worked.
Right.
But he was a real purchase. They now had the money. He had the house, and they're going to get it back when,
Understood. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's another advantage. So I mean, to me, the long-term care insurance is the queen in the chess game.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's important is exactly what you said, Brian. Every situation is different. And one of the things I find with people is they'll want to do the same thing as someone else they know. Maybe it's one of their siblings or maybe their neighbor down the street. And, that's where you kind of have to put the kibosh on it and say, you've got your own unique profile as a family, financially, estate-wise. You need to work with your own attorney to kind of craft what's going to be the custom fit for you, not your neighbors down the street.
And what if the neighbors made a bad choice?
Correct.
You're
Correct.
gonna go down that same road.
Two bad choices then. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, all our clients who it seems like who call in want to do something that they heard from somebody else. So
Exactly.
that's a great point. Any
Yeah.
last thoughts about long-term care insurance, about when it is to buy it, when to look at it? And
Yeah. As I said, I think that, the buying public is generally in their 50s because of where they're at in their lives. Some people get married young, have children young, they're going to look at this sooner. Some people get married later, have children later. They might not hit on this until they're in their early 60s. I would say most of our declinations come from people that are in their late 60s and early 70s. By the time we get into that age group or those age cohorts, there's more stuff in people's health profile that could make them uninsurable. So you really don't want to wait that late because the pricing is going to be extremely high and the chances of insurability could be compromised. So that would be a closing remark, is think about it sooner rather than later.
okay, and it's got to coordinate with your overall estate plan too. I mean,
Exactly.
you don't just buy an insurance policy and not if it's a married couple, probably the most important document a married couple can have is not a will, but a durable power of attorney,
Mhm.
allowing the house to get moved.
Right.
And they've got to trust each other and be able to move it in the right direction at the right time.
Right.
But
Right.
long-term care insurance, I'm a real advocate of it. And if
Yeah.
you can't afford to buy the Cadillac of policies, at least get something if you can.
Absolutely. Something is better than nothing. It's a few hours of home care. It can be a lifesaver for the family, a real lifesaver.
And how hard is it to get the benefit paid out?
Well, legitimate claims are paid, but they have to fall into one of two categories. Either the person suffers from severe cognitive impairment, so their memory loss is significant, not moderate, not mild, but severe, or functionally they need help with 2 out of 6 activities of daily living, either bathing, continence, dressing, eating, toileting, or transferring, any 2, with an expectation it's going to last at least 90 days. So again, we go back to that long term, that chronic. We're not looking for something that's going to get better quickly, like, a knee replacement, a hip replacement. Those are going to generally, unless they go south, they're going to fall under the medical model, doctor's visits, surgery, rehab. But 2 out of 6 activities of daily living with the expectation it's going to last at least 90 days. So that's your functional definition. The 2 most common are bathing and dressing. So if you think about people, what could bring them down, those are the 2 most common.
Okay, well, great.
Okay.
Thank you, Toby. Really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
My pleasure.
Let's do it again sometime.
Okay, take care.
Take care. Bye.
Okay,
Bye, everybody.
bye.